Hello, music makers. Welcome back. I had a beautiful DM from a viewer recently. They were thanking me because through my music they had met their partner and they were now married. Wow, what could I say other than congratulations and what an honour. In the next message, however, they then asked me, was the kick drum in that track a sample from Splice? I'm joking, of course. No, the reason I'm making today's video is I've had a lot of questions recently asking, how do I make my own drum sounds? I don't want to use other people's samples. So we need to have a chat. Let me give you my thoughts on when making your own sounds matters and when it doesn't. So to answer this question properly, first we need to understand why the question is being asked. This is definitely the kind of question I would have asked when I was younger. Idolising artists like Trent Reznor, I spent all of my formative years learning music. How to play music, how to write music, how to program it, how to engineer it. I was aspiring to be the same kind of artist, the guy that could do it all. That version of me would have never considered using samples. Why would I use a sample thousands of others have access to when I could make my own? I've put in all of that work, after all. And now with today's tech, everything's in one box. Virtual instruments, free effects. Why wouldn't you? The whole concept of the one-person prodigy is much less of an idealized aspiration these days. Instead, it's more of an expected norm. But as the old saying goes, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So obviously a part of this question comes from a kind of originality paranoia. In my case, there's definitely some sunk cost fallacy in there as well. But there's also some branding confusion, some identity confusion, which we'll talk about later as well. Let's talk about opportunity cost. So sure, we can make everything ourselves, but what does it cost in the long run? Obviously, time is a big factor. One of the viewers asking how to make their own drum samples was on the disco drums video, where I showed I didn't have to do a lot to the drums because I'd already picked the right sounds. I also argued that the time that saves helps you take advantage of your inspiration. But here's the other side of the story. Suppose you are a new disco producer, as in the new disco genre, and you want to separate yourself by not using any samples. One of the main hurdles you might come across is most of your reference tracks having those classic disco guitar lines in them, but you don't play guitar. So if you want one, you've got two options. You have to either hire someone or start learning the guitar. Because as it turns out, very much like drums, virtual instruments and synthesizers can't make very realistic guitar sounds without resorting to sampling. Now, if we just extend this originality argument to its logical conclusion, you might say you don't want to hire someone because that's not your original line. That's still someone else's work. But with the current state of Fiverr these days, you can't trust that it's not just a splice loop already, or indeed AI, which is happening a lot these days. So you spend those 6 months fighting through the pain in your fingers to get to the point where you can play a half-decent disco lick. But there's still more problems. Is it still really that original? Did you buy a truly original guitar, a one-of-a-kind, or is it a mass-produced one because it's your first instrument? Is that still truly original? It certainly won't sound it, and not to mention anyway, because you're still at the early basic stages of learning the instrument, anything you do play at this point is going to be fairly simple, and therefore extremely likely to have been done before. In real terms, it could potentially be another 5 years before you do anything truly original with that instrument. And if we're going all the way with this argument, should you really be using synths that everyone else has access to, like Vital or Serum? That's not going to be very original, is it? Shouldn't you be building your own modular rack? And to that end, should you even be using a DAW? That's not very original, is it? At the very least, swap to one of the more obscure pieces of software like Super Collider, as Aphex Twin did, or Max MSP, like Autechre do. Now we're starting to approach original. Okay, so that's a bit of an extreme angle. That's a bit of a ridiculous hypothesis. But let me give you a real-world professional example from my situation. I can play guitar, have done for many, many years. I made about 12 soulful disco tracks recently. Why on earth would I pick a splice sample? Instead of picking up one of these 4 real guitars I have directly to my right as I speak? There's 2 layers to this answer. First, picture this. To make my own guitar line, I would have to, first of all, make sure the guitar is in tune. Then I either have to plug into an amplifier and set up a microphone in a well-treated room, or if I'm trying to be quick, I'll plug straight into my audio interface and use a virtual amp software. Luckily, I have a good knowledge of amplifiers and guitars, so it doesn't take me too long to find the correct tone. which is more involved than you might think. I have to worry about playing it with the right technique on the right area of the fretboard, on the correct pickup combination, whilst also knowing which amplifier and which speaker and which microphone combination will give me the tone I'm after. Then I have to practice. I'm not in the top 0.01% of players in the world, so I'm not going to get it on the first take. It's going to be at least 10 takes of practicing to get the groove correct. Then there's any editing that needs to be done of the performance, and obviously the mixing afterwards. Have you fallen asleep yet? You're not even the one playing guitar, remember? So there we go. There's a couple of hours and we've got our unique guitar line. But still we have to ask the question, why? More specifically, a better question is, who is it for? If we go back to the couple I mentioned in the intro that met over one of my tracks, that had guitars in it. It was a tropical house track. Now, I wasn't there, and I don't know the full story, but I'm guessing while they were staring lovingly into each other's eyes, as my track played in the background, presumably, not one of their 86 billion neurons in their brain fired towards the thoughts of, I wonder if these guitars are sampled or played live. Much in the same way that all those people dancing to your track on the dance floor are not wondering if the top loops are from Splice. This isn't how most people experience music. You and me might think like that when we're in the club, but not them. I'm not saying it's never worth it, but we have to make a call versus that opportunity cost. What could have been done in the time we lost, like finishing the track, for example, versus what did we gain by spending the time? To know that, we must consider two main factors. Is this the producer talking, or is it the artist or the engineer? It's important we recognize which hat we are wearing, because only the producer usually knows the final vision for the track, and, to that end, knows who it is for, regardless of what the artists or the engineers want to do, even if all those are the same person. And alongside this, we must also be aware of the brand. For example, if I am going to record my own guitar line, because my branding is that I am a musician, I could record a video of me playing that line, use it on my YouTube channel, and make the narrative of the track release all around the fact that it was a live guitar line. All of that fits my brand. I have a YouTube presence, I have an artist presence, people know I'm a musician, and guitars still aren't that common on dance music. All that makes sense. But if that's not you, if you recognize that you're not being a producer and you're actually being an artist, and it turns out the only reason you're being a sample purist is this originality paranoia, then taking the time to record or synthesize your own unique drums without it being part of your brand or part of the story in a genre that it doesn't benefit or an audience that doesn't care, then that's just technical masturbation. All you've achieved is a personal high score. Nobody cares. It makes no difference to your Spotify numbers. It's like telling your mum you got a no-hit run on Dark Souls. So back to my disco guitar decision. If I am not going to film that video of me playing it live and show everyone the story, and if the line itself is not important enough, maybe it's just one of those rhythmic background parts, then yes, absolutely, I'm going to reach for a splice loop. Then I could be done in 10 minutes and move on to more important things. This concept of wearing different hats, knowing which role you're in, is very important. I did a whole video on what a producer really is. Going back to the Trent Reznor example, if I may, when I first heard the albums The Downward Spiral and The Fragile, I was starting to get some knowledge around synthesizers and how sound was made. And the main thing that blew my mind about those albums was they're full of sounds that don't exist anywhere else before or since. I have no idea, even to this day, how a lot of the sounds on those albums were created. However, most people's reaction to those albums is something more like, this chap doesn't sound like he's enjoying life right now. Because they react like normal people, emotionally to the sound as a whole, not like I did with the ears of an engineer and artist. Or here's a good example. I did a video on the whole Chicane versus Calvin Harris thing. I spent 15 minutes showing as factually as I could how none of the notes, the rhythms, the chords, the chord voicings, or the sounds themselves were the same in either record. For example, we know that the Chicane record is a keyboard preset, whereas Calvin Harris recorded his guitars live. But despite what's obvious to my ears, or how clearly I presented the facts, that comment section is still full of Chicane fans speaking in hyperbolic or absolute terms, saying things like, Calvin definitely stole it. Because they can't hear it, they don't care. To them, it sounds the same. Much in the way that people who don't listen to dance music would think Eli Brown sounds like the same kind of techno as DVS1. And even to a certain crossover audience within techno, that distinction doesn't matter. They don't care. So we have to make sure we're wearing our producer's hat, and we have to know what our brand, our identity, our story is before we ask the question, how do I make my own original drum samples? Because we need to know who it's for and will they care? Because if it's just for you, well, that's fine, but that's what we call a hobby. Now, I'm worried I've played the cynic a little bit too much here, a bit too much naysaying. Please don't get me wrong, I am not saying the goal of sounding original is not a valid one. That's really what we all want, eventually. I am saying think about where you spend that time and energy. It's important to distinguish that sounding original is not the same as having original sounds. Does that make sense? An audience might not care that you've used an original drum sound, but they might care that you sound original. For example, you could use the same techno sounds that have been used for years, and you could also take a very common guitar sound from a certain genre. But what if that genre is bluegrass? So the guitar sound is a banjo, and you put that over a techno beat. Well, then you get Swamp Thing by The Grid. Are those original sounds? No. Does it sound original? Absolutely. How about you take a classic 80s ARP sound and synthwave drum set, but instead of making all the standard synthwave tracks that everyone else is doing, why not start the track at 30 BPM, slowly ramp it up over a few minutes up to 128 BPM, and then when you drop, the chord progression moves in bars of 6 instead of 4 or 8. That's Opus, Eric Prydz. Are they original sounds? No. Does it sound original? Yes. Back in the 90s, someone made a completely original genre by speeding up hip-hop breaks to 170 BPM. Original sounds? No. Was it original? Yes. Now, don't get me wrong. As artists, I know full well we are always seeking to improve our craft. So what I would say is, if you have already got original track making, original song making down, great. The next evolution to your sound could well be original sound making. But if you don't yet, if you don't have the writing, the arrangement, the production, and especially the branding, which we'll talk about next, if you don't have that down yet, I would personally recommend focusing your energy there before looking at individual sounds. Having said all that, let me present an argument for making your own original sounds. Multiple times on this channel, I have tried to emphasize the importance of brand. It turns out making music is the easy bit compared to branding. And if you love making music and that's where you spend all of your energy, guess what bit you're going to be bad at? It turns out that even those that are really good at making music aren't also really good at letting people know they exist. I'm not joking when I tell people it's 80-20. 80% of making music for a living is not making the music. Brand has always been important. It doesn't have to be the mass-marketed $1 million type by record labels. It could be just your own personal story. But now record labels aren't important. We can go direct to our audience. The music technology itself means more people are having a go at making music. And of course, some of that enabling technology is AI. Now we live in a time where it's not just humans that are making music. That means literally hundreds of thousands of tracks released every day. How on earth is one expected to stand out above the noise? Well, it's not a stretch to imagine a future where the value of music to many consumers becomes much more about the story of how it was made, not the actual output, not the track itself. So in that world, if you can make it part of your brand and you can solve the puzzle of how to tell the story and who to tell it to, then yes, it is absolutely worth taking the time to sample or synthesize your own drum sounds. Now, I'm still not saying that the audience that cares about that would exist or would be big enough to sustain a career. But if they did, that would be a good reason why you would endeavor in the first place. Whew, okay, rant over. Let me know your thoughts down below. And actually, let me know what you think of the backing track. I made every sound and every drum from scratch. Did you notice? Do you care? And for once, I will not be releasing the presets, because that wouldn't be very original of you now, would it? Don't forget to press some buttons if you found it helpful, or there's a link in the description to buy me a coffee should you feel so generous. Until next week, I will see you in the comments. Bye-bye.